Nearly 50 years after its release, Star Wars still captures our imaginations. One of the reasons it remains so endlessly fascinating is the sheer size of its universe. Even in the original movie, which mostly took place across a few planets and starships, there was the suggestion of a much bigger galaxy waiting to be discovered. Now, of course, we have a whole bunch of spin-off shows exploring different areas and time periods of that universe. It's a lot to keep straight in your head, so for your convenience, here is our chronological guide. Let's punch it. Oh, needless to say, some spoilers ahead. A New Hope was, of course, set a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. The Phantom Menace was set 30 years before that. But the Star Wars universe goes back much further, thousands of generations in fact, with long periods of war, peace, and everything in between. So far, we've only seen the distant past of the franchise explored in books, comics, and games like the Knights of the Old Republic. But that's about to change. The Acolyte, a recently announced Disney Plus live-action series, will take place many years before the events of the prequel trilogy, way back in the days of the High Republic. Very little is known about the show, which has been masterminded by Russian doll creator Leslie Headland.
Didn't you get the news? We're about to die.
It doesn't matter, I die all the time.
Me too.
But we're willing to bet that its vision of the Star Wars universe will look very different from anything we've seen so far. But we're also willing to bet that there will be lightsabers. Some of our subscribers probably weren't even born when this next entry came out, way back in 2003, which is honestly kind of disgusting, maybe even illegal? But anywho, Clone Wars was created by legendary animation genius Genndy Tartakovsky. If you haven't seen his masterpiece Samurai Jack, do yourself a favor and check it out. A micro-series that took place in the time period between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, Clone Wars used awesome stylized animation and minimal dialogue to show us episodes in the war, filling in tantalizing bits of backstory and giving hints of Anakin's turn to the dark side. It also introduced General Grievous before his first appearance in Revenge of the Sith.
Hello there.
If you haven't come across it, it's worth your time. We still get chills thinking about this scene. Clone Wars ended up being a backdoor pilot for a much more expansive and long-running series called, imaginatively, The Clone Wars. See what they did there? With the... Anyway, the production and broadcast history of the show is complicated. There were cancellations, uncancellations, changes to canon, acquisitions, it's a whole thing. But in terms of Star Wars lore, the Clone Wars took place between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, with the final season running alongside the events of the third prequel. It used CGI animation rather than the more traditional style of its predecessor, and was a big hit with critics and audiences. It also introduced some characters that have become extremely beloved to fans, such as a certain Ahsoka Tano, who we will come back to. The Clone Wars also brought us a motley crew of clone troopers called the Bad Batch, in an episode entitled The Bad Batch. Those guys now have their own show called, you guessed it, The Bad Batch. The most recent Star Wars show to premiere, this Disney Plus animated series takes place after the events of the prequel trilogy, in the period before A New Hope. It brings us the further adventures of the titular Bad Batch, clone troopers with strange genetic mutations, as they try to make a living as mercenaries in a galaxy in turmoil. And speaking of turmoil, poor Obi-Wan Kenobi. First, his master gets killed in front of him. Then, he gets saddled with an apprentice he really never wanted to train in the first place. And then, that apprentice goes on to kill 99% of his fellow Jedi, including a bunch of kids. And then Obi-Wan chops his legs off, and he goes on to become the most fearsome warlord in the galaxy. Anybody would need a long vacation after that. So it's fitting that the forthcoming limited Obi-Wan Kenobi series will show us what Obi-Wan did during his garden leave on Tatooine, or should that be desert leave? Anyway, it's safe to assume that Obi-Wan isn't just gonna get really into baking or yoga during that time, especially as it's been confirmed that Hayden Christensen will be returning as Lord Vader himself. We can't wait to see what happens during this particular piece of Star Wars history. What might a series called Star Wars Rebels be about? If you guessed that it was concerned with the early days of the rebellion in the years leading up to A New Hope, when they were a fledgling outfit engaging in skirmishes within the new galactic empire? Whoa, good guess. Or maybe you saw it when it aired between 2014 and 2018. Either way, this award-winning CGI series covered some pivotal moments in the history of everyone's favorite galaxy far, far away. We won't spoil them here, but as well as bringing us new revelations, it also tied up a few story arcs from the Clone Wars. Oh, and it introduced a certain sinister blue guy who fans think we may see again in a future property. Everybody loves Cassian Andor, that devastatingly handsome and troubled rebel spy and star of Rogue One. With his sultry stare, dark past, and wisecracking droid sidekick, oh, he's quite a guy. We regret to inform you that Cassian Andor and his wisecracking droid sidekick both died heroically on Scarif. So how exactly is Diego Luna returning as the old scoundrel Cassian for his Disney Plus spin-off show? Easy, it's a prequel. Andor, which is set to be released next year, takes place 5 years before the events of Rogue One, and will give us some background on this fascinating anti-hero and the early days of the rebellion. Imagine, if you can, the 1980s. It was a different time. Big hair, big shoulder pads, the movie Big, starring Tom Hanks, and two strange little animated Star Wars spin-off shows called Droids and Ewoks. You can see the logic. Kids love droids. Kids love Ewoks. So let's make some fun kid shows starring the droids and the Ewoks. Doesn't matter that the shows were largely kinda terrible. Kids wanted more Star Wars, and that's what they got. These two shows, which took place before the events of the original trilogy, were created by the same team behind the animated sequences in the, shall we say, controversial Star Wars Holiday Special. And while they're no longer canon, they're a fascinating early example of an attempt to expand Star Wars beyond the movies. And as we've seen, they would by no means be the last. A somewhat more successful spin-off is The Mandalorian, which you might have heard of. Disney Plus, huge budget, spaceships and explosions and lightsabers, guy in a helmet? Yeah, that's the one. One common criticism of The Force Awakens, episode 7 of the main movie series, was that it didn't quite explain the state of play in the galaxy following the events of Return of the Jedi. What was it like when the Empire fell? How did the balances of power shift? What happened to the little guys who were just trying to make a living? The Mandalorian attempts to answer that, showing us a ground-level view of a tumultuous time in the galaxy. This is the dark and seedy underbelly of the Star Wars universe, where the bounty hunters and mercenaries and Baby Yoda traffickers live. How successful has it been? Well, we'll give you a clue. Our next 3 entries are all spin-offs of this spin-off, so yeah, pretty successful. Boba Fett occupies a strange place in the mythology of Star Wars and its wider fandom. For a long time, he was many fans' answer to the question, who is the coolest character in the series? For other fans, though, that answer was mystifying. Sure, the guy looks cool with his distinctive battered armor, but what did he actually do? Stood around, fired his blaster a couple times, then got eaten. Much of the expanded universe material tried to deliver on the badassery that fans had read into the bounty hunter's design, but arguably, it was The Mandalorian that gave us the uncompromising, lethal warrior that we had expected. And now he's getting his own spin-off show, The Book of Boba Fett. Will it build on the success of The Mandalorian, or will Boba Fett once again be rendered a joke? Either way, at least he's got a rad new palace to operate from. The suggestion seems to be that the Mandalorian spin-offs will operate sort of like Phase 1 of the MCU, with the characters having solo adventures and eventually encountering each other for a climactic team-up, or possibly conflict. Sounds cool, but really we just want to see more of Rosario Dawson's Ahsoka Tano. And hey, that's what we are going to get in the limited series Ahsoka. Very little is currently known about this show, just that it will focus on Anakin Skywalker's dual-wielding Padawan. Reports conflict as to when it will be set. Some suggest it will take place in an unspecified post-Rebels period. Some that it will take place during the same post-Return of the Jedi time span as The Mandalorian. Whatever the answer, we are pretty excited. So we've seen what the little guys, the mercenaries, and the ex-Empire scumbags do following the final defeat of Emperor Palpatine. Oh, well, the first of 2 final defeats of Emperor Palpatine, that is. But what about the ostensible good guys? The guys who used to be rebels? The New Republic? Well, look no further than Rangers of the New Republic, which will give us the idea of just how challenging it was to keep order in the chaos following the end of the Galactic Civil War. Again, we don't know much in the way of detail, but we're sure that Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, and the rest of the Star Wars Brain Trust will find some interesting unexplored corners of the universe to expand on. Star Wars Resistance, which ran for 2 seasons between 2018 and 2020, is currently the Star Wars spin-off that has explored the furthest into the future of the universe, taking place just before and during the events of the sequel trilogy. Stepping away from the CGI animation familiar to viewers of the Clone Wars and Rebels, it went for a hybrid cel-shaded look, and did a pretty good job of filling in the background of this new post-ROTJ time period. It even won a Saturn Award. Good job, Resistance. And finally, did you know there's going to be a Lando series about Lando Calrissian? When will it be set? We don't know. Which version of Lando will be in it? Billy D. Williams? Donald Glover? Both? Somebody new? We don't know. What we do know is that it's happening. That's all, folks. For now. What's great about Star Wars is that there's always another background character in need of a backstory. Remember that red droid in A New Hope that Uncle Owen nearly buys instead of R2? Well, according to one comic, he's called Skippy, and he's Force sensitive. Okay, it's not canon for the moment.
Do you think they'll melt us down?